I also dealt with crippling anxiety. There would be days where I just couldn't face going in.
Hello everyone, my name's Luke and I'm your host of the Mind.Set podcast, where we explore the interchange between adversity and growth. In this season we'll be exploring lots of new themes and some familiar themes, as well as understanding how we can all grow and evolve as people. All right, so welcome everyone to the Mind.Set podcast. And this is one of our episodes where we're teaming up with the This Is Me campaign. And today we've got Susanna with us. Thanks for coming, Susanna. Really appreciate you being here. Perhaps we could start by you just introducing yourself and telling us a bit about yourself before we start.
So I'm Susanna Winter. I'm currently working as a research librarian at Herbert Smith Freehills LLP. Been there for about 10 years, but in a previous life, as it were, I was quite involved with the This Is Me campaign, and it's really nice to be here today.
Very good, very good. So the Mind.Set podcast series and sort of what we're trying to do with the This Is Me campaign is combining the two together, and the Mind.Set concept is all about embracing adversity for positive change, and the This Is Me campaign, as you'll know, is all about dispelling the myth that, you know, people have to be all right, and in the workplace, you know, people go through challenges. So I wonder if we could start with you in terms of where you are today versus where you were, you know, however many years ago. Where did your journey start in terms of your career, and B, some of the challenges that you started to face in those earlier days before it became a problem?
So I'll keep it as short as I can, but basically I grew up in a really happy household, but also quite a challenging household. My sister, Roz, has bipolar depression. It was diagnosed when she was in her teens. And the reason I bring her up so quickly is that actually being a sibling of somebody with quite a severe mental health condition comes with quite a few challenges. And from quite an early age, I was not deliberately, but almost kind of conditioned to make everything okay. So I was loved. It was a really safe household in many ways, but I kind of had a constant compulsion to make sure everyone was happy, to make sure I wasn't causing any trouble, my brother as well, and to, I don't know, be perfect, I suppose. I was lucky enough to gain a place at Oxford. At this point, my husband would say, there's no luck in it, you work bloody hard, it was great. And the imposter syndrome kind of took root pretty early on, I would say. I was amongst loads of people who were as bright or brighter than I was. I loved my studies there, but there was always that need to be good, need to be right. What am I doing here? Do I even deserve it? Bit of me. I was quite an anxious child and then young adult. Nothing that kind of stopped me, really. I would say I had a few times where I needed to take a step back and take a break. I would throw myself into things, I don't know, burn the candle at both ends. The classic, you know, working so hard in an essay that I was finishing it off 2 minutes before I stepped into my tutor's room, that kind of thing. So I kind of put lots of pressure on myself almost because of that underlying, I need to be perfect. And took that into my career. Trained as a languages teacher, my degree was in languages, and taught as a secondary school teacher for about 5 years. And that's where the work anxiety really raised its ugliest head.
When you were a secondary school teacher? Right.
I think I'd never experienced the whole wake up at 4 a.m. in a cold sweat worrying about work, and I did exactly that during my teaching time. I knew I was a good teacher. I knew I could stand and, you know, deliver a good lesson, build good relationships with my pupils. But I also dealt with crippling anxiety over, I don't know, everything that goes with the teaching career. And ultimately, after about 5 years, I didn't really seek any help at that point. My husband was really supportive. My friends were great, but I didn't seek any third-party help.
Right.
And so I carried that. The way I dealt with it was to step away from teaching and to think, actually, this isn't for me after all. I'm going to step away.
And when you got to that point when you were teaching, were there any flutters or clues as to experiencing anxiety or challenges with this need to be perfect before that, or was it low level enough that you hadn't really registered it?
I think I had registered it. I knew during my time at university that, with my head, I knew I was good. I knew that I was intelligent. I knew that I could perform well. But in my heart, somehow I was never as good as other people. I was never as good as my peers. It's hard to explain why. Nobody put that pressure on me externally. Everybody encouraged me to perform well. It was very much an internal thing. I don't think my parents or closest relatives had any particular idea that I was dealing with anxiety. Some of my friends did. I opened up a little bit to them and they'd be like, oh, don't be so ridiculous. But I think it was low level enough, as you say, that I was able to contain it.
And when you look back at that period before you went to secondary, is there anything, do you reflect on it objectively and think that you didn't perform well enough?
Yeah. I mean, you'll obviously know that there's different levels of degree, and I would aspire to get a first, because anything like that in my head wasn't good enough. And in fact, because looking back on it, I was so anxious, as I got towards the end of my studies, I was performing less well because all the anxiety in my head was building, and I came out with a 2-2. Now everyone was like, yes, Susanna, but it's an Oxford 2-2. You could have got a first. There were all sorts of reasons why not. And in fact, my sister was very ill at that point. To give you an example, there were various points where, I don't know, for one of my degree ceremonies, in fact, she was very poorly and I had to cancel and not go because everything was so difficult at home. So, yeah, to cut a long story short, I didn't perform as well as I, in my head, thought I should have done.
And interestingly, do you think, and we'll get back to the secondary school teacher, in the time, but do you think that has played out in a positive or negative way in your life, that experience of getting the 2-2 and where you are today?
Initially, yes. I think at the time it was the worst possible thing that could have happened. I smile at the memory now because I've got a niece just in her first term at Cambridge, and I can see so much of myself in her as I look at her and what she's going through now. And actually, yes, for a number of years in my career, it was always at the back of my mind, and the whole, you could have done better. And what if you had got a first, and would you have had a more glittering career? Would you have been more of a source of pride to your parents? Are they disappointed in you? No one ever said it, but it was all in my head. Yeah.
And then has that changed now?
Yeah, I think it has. I think I've laid that ghost to rest. It took me quite a ridiculously long time to do so, but I'm pleased to say that at the age of 58, that doesn't impact on me. I don't wake up worrying about.
But do you think do you think that what you had thought initially is true? Do you think getting the 2-2 really had any negative impact in your life?
No. It's very interesting. I had some therapy, and we can go into sort of reasons why later, fairly recently. And as part of that, we explored that period in my life. And I was able to say, that's not an issue anymore. But it did, as I say, it took a ridiculously, in my mind, long time.
Well, it sounds like it really plays into that fear around being imperfect and how you were shaped with your sister. But I think that those things are really, I didn't have a hugely dissimilar experience at university. I came out, it was all fine, it was a 2-1, but earlier before that I was really bitterly disappointed in what happened in my A-levels, and at the time, of course, it really impacts you.
It does.
And it's really hard to not define yourself based on that, because that's what you're being judged on at the time. That's literally an exam or a qualification. But what I find really interesting is these things ultimately don't change who you are, really. No. They have an impact on who you are, of course, in the journey, but if you embrace it in the right way, And then you get to a point, where I am today, I look back on those things and I think, well, it's not made of blind, but no one's ever said to me, what did you get in your A levels? It's not,
exactly.
And therefore you can't do X, Y, or Z. Do you see what I mean? So it's really, I think, good to acknowledge that whilst it has a really important part to play in how you are as an individual at the time and moving forward, these fears often just don't come true, from my experience anyway.
No, I totally agree. And I think, looking back, it feels ridiculous, but it's incredible how powerful those feelings are at the time.
And then, so secondary school comes around, and and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming because of different types of pressure in terms of timelines, deadlines, etc., all of a sudden that desire to be perfect and elevated in everything you do becomes harder to achieve, and therefore you're left feeling more anxious. Is that what happened?
Massively. And, as I say, I knew I was a good teacher in my head.
Yeah.
But if I had a less than perfect lesson, whereas I think the most successful teachers were able to acknowledge that and to walk away and think, okay, maybe I did a bit wrong, but actually the class were in a terrible state. Right. There was a storm going on outside. That person just would not have been stopped, whatever had happened. There's all sorts of reasons why that went wrong. Whereas in my mind, I would go straight to, that was all your fault. That way of thinking was already there. Yeah. I don't think I recognised it fully at the time, although various people gently pointed it out to me or made me question it. But I think it was there.
And so playing the tape forward then, so you, at the time, your way of dealing was to exit that career.
Yeah.
And then you went on to go into legal research, was it?
I did, actually. So I stepped away. It happened, actually, to cut a long story short, that my husband David was working at King's College London at the time, and they just needed an information assistant. I'd never really worked in information, seemed quite good, quite enjoyed it. Got a job initially for Slaughter and May as a what they called a pre-library school graduate information assistant. Really enjoyed it. Decided I would pursue it as a career. Went and did a master's at UCL. Worked at a couple of law firms, so Slaughters, and then moved on to Denton's. And then landed at Baker McKenzie in 2004, where I eventually managed the library and research centre. So that was my next step.
And that role, did you feel that there was, because that role, obviously people might listen to that and say library and just think of like a public library or whatever, but of course it would involve much more. I'm assuming it involves a lot of internal research to keep the firm up with what's going on in law, and also making sure that if queries arise or that documents are kept, all that kind of stuff. So did that come with its own different type of deadline pressure and that kind of thing? How did that?
It did. Right. Yeah, a real mix. So yes, there's the stereotypical view of what a library's like, and then there's a busy law library. And yeah, you're right. It could be quite pressured. There would be deadlines to meet. There'd be important research that needed to be carried out quickly. There would be negotiation of contracts. I managed quite a large budget of for the online resources that we managed. Hundreds of thousands of pounds contract negotiation, which was quite a new thing for me. I was managing people, which I loved, but also came with its own pressures. So yeah, different sorts of anxieties, and that perfectionism was still there. You're not good enough, really. Someone will find you out. What are you doing managing? And the 4 a.m. anxiety did creep back in quite regularly. And
then what ultimately happened?
So the anxiety would still be there regularly. It was generally manageable. Right. I did actually, during that point, for the first time, need to take some time out with the anxiety, because there would be days where I just couldn't face going in. My manager was really supportive. The firm was really supportive. All of that was great. And yeah, it felt like that was all under control quite well. And then a really nice opportunity arose. I was able to step into a maternity cover for a corporate responsibility role within the firm. It's a long story, but basically I was already on the charity committee. There were various circumstances which meant it was a good point for me to make that move. It was something I was interested in. And that first step led into a role of, I think, about 10 years, actually, working in corporate responsibility within the same firm.
Right.
So I moved into that role, stepped away from the library role, but was still in the same organisation.
Yeah.
I think there were lots of things that made it a really good fit for me. As I say, I'd already been volunteering with the charity committee. I think one of my strengths is community building, human connection. And as a librarian, as a teacher, arguably, you can become quite a hub. People know you, people know they can come to you, they feel at ease with you. All of that made me quite good at the role, I think.
Yeah.
I was liaising with everybody from trainee solicitors to the business services team to fairly senior partners, persuading people to get involved in things like volunteering, perhaps charitable fundraising, even pro bono in the early days of the role. And I was quite good at persuading people. Were happy to say yes generally, and it was a role that I did well.
And that role, did that bring a new sort of pair of glasses, a new perspective in your life, do you think? Did that change how you started to interact with what was going on in your mind and the anxiety you had been going through?
Yes and no. Right. In some ways, yes. It was hard to deny that actually, I was liked and respected and given and trusted. But I would say that the script in my head was still going very, very strong. And actually the anxiety grew. Rather than diminishing, it grew. It was, there was more scope in my head almost for me to tell myself that I wasn't good enough, that I was an imposter, and that somebody would probably find me out one day. And I did, sadly, need to, on 2 occasions, step away because the anxiety became too great. Each time just for a few weeks, each time with loads of support.
Right. And what does that support look like?
So an understanding manager, somebody who without judgment would say, totally understand, I've listened to you, it's clear you need to step away. But also all of the amazing support that comes with working for a firm, a large law firm, in terms of benefits and the fact that you have access to counselling, to I don't know, just that you have the support to be able to step away and to deal with that, and to know that when you come back there will be support. Yeah.
Because also being away,
yes,
if you don't have the right, if people don't give you the right permission, can double down on the anxiety, can't it?
It can.
I've been through that, not through anyone's fault other than myself, but my mind will then undermine what someone said to me, and I'll go, well, you're now just more useless because you're not there.
And I think I went through exactly that. Right. I felt as if I'd failed. So each time, each of those 2 times when I needed to step back, my mind was telling me that I'd failed, that I wasn't good enough, and that actually all those thoughts for all those years had been right.
Yes,
and that what was I doing there? And
so that's what courage looks like by my account, because to be able to do that involves a lot of courage, because you're going, this is one of the last things in that moment, in that kind of mental crisis, if you're using that word, that I can still control. But because there's a deeper knowing that it's going to be better for me, I'm going to let go of that last component I can control, i.e. I can turn up for work, and hopefully that will quiet my head a bit more because I will feel like less of a failure. But irrelevant of that, I'm going to step away anyway. So I think that's a really courageous act to do, because in the instant you do it, like you say, it's just doubling down. It's not making it better.
Exactly.
And then how did you find having the time off, and what did you hold on to try and help you?
I think it was one of the things that I found hardest was actually just to let go of work. So I had to really I think I just had to really remind myself of what people had said, and so colleagues. I had a very supportive husband who would ensure that I did not pick up my iPhone and check my emails. So that helped. And I had to take, managers at their word that, this will be fine. It is more important for you to step away and to give your head some space.
Yeah.
But ultimately, even coming back after those things, I would say that pattern of thinking continued till I reached a bigger crisis point further down the line.
Right. And what ultimately happened there? What was that?
So basically, lots of positive things had happened. I'm fast forwarding quite a lot to the lockdown period. And I would say, actually, for me, that was quite a productive time. As I say, I think human connection is one of the things that I do really well. And so leading up to that time, I got involved in various other things. So it wasn't just corporate responsibility, where I was helping manage some of the social mobility outreach that we were doing. And I was also part of the fairly newly formed wellbeing group, mental health team, and actually ended up co-chairing that staff-led group along with a partner in the corporate team. And when we went into lockdown, actually, I was able to use the skills that I'd probably tell you I don't have, but I did in fact have, to help build some links to. I think when you are good at human connection, it can sometimes set people at their ease to tell their stories. We'd already, before lockdown happened, been involved in the This Is Me campaign. Right. We'd done a video, and I'd got gradually more involved in that side of things. Yeah. And I think I was able to, make people relaxed enough to be able to tell their own stories. Yeah. Ironically, I was probably still quite anxious myself.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that period was really good in terms of how I was able to use my own skills. But then various things happened on a personal level for me. Yeah. And that's what really came to the crunch point. So in April of 2020, my father died. He died fairly close to the start of lockdown. Right. He'd had cancer for many years, but actually it was in April that things started to become very much worse. And as you'll remember, we weren't allowed to travel. We weren't allowed to visit anyone. My mum was basically caring for Dad at home. I was in East London. She was in Sussex. She and Dad were in Sussex. And my brother and sister-in-law and nieces and my sister, in fact, were all living close by, but nobody could obviously go and visit. That was clearly a really hard time for me. Yeah. Dad and I were close. Yeah. He was, apparently sort of saying, well, why can't Susanna just come? And I just felt torn, really heartbroken. In fact, amazingly, he ended up going to a hospice, and the hospice called on the day he died and said, look, if you can get here, come. And our amazing neighbour drove me down to Sussex in his van, which is a whole nother story. But that was a tough time. Yeah.
Amplified by the lockdown as well.
Definitely. Yeah. I got through it. My colleagues were amazing, as always. I felt really supported. All of that was really great, but it was a really painful time. And then 2 years later, almost to the day, actually, Mum was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Right. It was something totally unexpected. Right. She had felt a bit tired. But had lost her appetite. But she was in her 80s. She was kind of, well, that just happens, doesn't it? But 3 weeks later, she'd died.
So given no time at all?
No time whatsoever. We were out of lockdown by then. I was able to go and spend some time with her, which was great. But it's hard to describe the impact that had on me. I think it felt like, it felt like my whole world had been totally thrown up in the air and destroyed for a while. Yeah. Even though I had that amazing support. Yeah. David was brilliant. My friends were amazing. Yeah. Work were really supportive. but it changed things in ways I totally hadn't expected. Losing a parent is obviously always stressful.
Yeah.
But my sister totally lost the ability to cope. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying that mum had in fact been basically a almost full-time carer for her, and they hadn't engaged with the mental health support that Ros needed. And so I found myself in a position where there was a massive pressure to step in and take on the role that my mum had taken.
And when you were in that period, was there any event that occurred where you were able to go, okay, I'm going to start moving in a different direction? Because that sounds like free fall.
It was free fall.
And then at some point we're trying to grab onto a branch, just anything to just try and stop us from free falling. Or was it a very slow, almost unnoticeable change?
Probably a combination. I mean, work, as I say, were brilliant, gave me plenty of time, said, take the time that you need, come back when you're ready. All of that was really reassuring. My anxiety was raging.
And how did that manifest, just out of interest, as a side note, the anxiety?
I felt sick. I wasn't sleeping. I had a knot in my stomach all the time. I wasn't even thinking you're not good enough, because I wasn't really capable of proper thought at that point. I'd say I was probably existing.
Yeah.
David was again amazing. He was, supporting me as best he could. Everybody was supporting me as best they could. But in my head, I had to fix this. I had to juggle my job. I had to keep that going and be perfect in my job. And I also had to fix my sister. I had to find her help. I had to do it now. If I couldn't have her to live with me, then I was failing. It was, as you say, it was free fall. I did keep going at work. And I think, I don't know how, it wasn't particularly necessarily dramatic, but I do remember working from home one day and just thinking, you could just step away from this. Something has to give. You cannot carry on like this. My inner voice is quite stern, and at that point it did manage to get itself heard. I think it must have been yelling, but eventually managed to get through to me and say, you cannot carry on like this. You're destroying yourself. I had been to the hairdresser randomly and she said, are you under stress? You're losing loads of hair. That hadn't occurred to me. And that was quite a good wake-up call.
It's interesting how much, as humans, we have to, and you can apply this, I think, to most things in varying degrees, but how much we have to be sort of beaten and bruised before we're able to go, hold on, this isn't working. We're resolute in a positive and negative way. In a negative way of like, it took that much for that inner voice to be heard. And you can apply the same even if it's like taking the wrong approach in business, and consistently doing it before you fundamentally change.
Exactly. And I think that's true. You can almost, there's a bit of you, and I don't think I'm particularly masochistic, but maybe I am. There's a bit of me that felt, well, you deserve this. This is your path. You have to go through this. You have to solve it. And if it's painful, then so be it. Maybe this is what you deserve. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but actually, when I was able to think calmly, and that voice got through, at first it felt a really, I don't know, irresponsible thing to do, to step away. My husband works for the University of London. Things had been a little bit, he knew he was going to be facing some challenges. And for me to step away and say, actually, I am going to leave was a tricky thing. I didn't have a plan. This isn't what you do with a career, is it? You make a plan, you step forward into the next stage of your career. This felt very unwise, and I'd not done really, I suppose I had done something like that before with teaching, but this felt
very different, bigger, and it's that courage again. And the what do you think when you look at that period, because that's, by all accounts, a hellish period, and what you're describing I can really deeply relate to, because that inner voice, if you're and it can be and there's a scientific element to all of this, of course, which is, if there's chemical imbalances and the neurons are manipulated and shaped over the life experiences you're going through, etc., there's only so much we can do.
Exactly.
But when you go through all of that, I can really relate to the attack on yourself, which I've definitely been through myself. What do you think is one or a couple of the biggest lessons that you took from that period now, when you're sort of talking about it sat here today?
I think I learned that actually everything that happened from my childhood to now, there's a lot that I am not actually responsible for. It was a hard lesson.
Yeah.
I had another course of therapy fairly recently, and I'd recommend that everybody does it. I think it's so helpful. But one of the questions I was asked was repeatedly actually, was why do you think this is your fault? Why do you think that thing that happened 30 years ago was your fault? Why is finding help for your sister, why is the fact that she needs help your fault? And in my mind there was something that very deeply believed that it was.
Yes.
And actually I think I have now started to learn to question myself, at least. I wouldn't say I'm doing it effectively all the time, but it's a lot better than it was.
Yeah. And if you had to meet your younger self at university, what do you think you'd be saying to her?
I think I would be saying, I suppose very similarly to what I say to my niece these days, which is, I would be asking those questions. Is it really true? If you didn't belong in this university, they wouldn't have given you a place.
Yeah. They
can see something in you. Okay, maybe you can't see it, but you need to trust that it is there and that you do deserve to be where you are.
Yeah.
But also go easy on yourself.
Yeah.
Take that time out. Go and do that fun thing that you want to do.
Yeah.
I don't know. Try and be in the moment more. It's quite ironic because I still think I'm not very good at that, but I'm a lot better than I was. But yeah.
And if we zoom out for a minute and look at the idea of what you've been through and trying to manage the practicalities of life, managing other people, doing your job to the standard you want to do, continuing on in your career, all of the things that all of us have to deal with in our lives. And then having to have conversations with people about what you're going through because you need time out, etc. Did you find it challenging from a work perspective to go, okay, I've got issues, I've got problems, mental health issues, whatever. Were those difficult conversations for you to have? I mean, because obviously for plenty of people, as I think we talked about before, and how would you suggest to someone else that they look after themselves whilst also, protecting their careers? Because of course we're not talking about, okay, the minute you feel a bit anxious, we all just need to stay at home, because we want to be in life,
Exactly.
We want to flourish. So what do you think that looks like?
So I guess what I did was quite a dramatic option. So I stepped away and I didn't have a job to go to. And I was really lucky because what I wasn't expecting to happen was that a little thought that I had, which was, hang on, you're still a qualified information professional.
Yeah.
I wonder, I'll just contact that agency. And then what was really fortunate, or as my husband would say, no, you worked hard for it, was that I interviewed for a research job at HSF and was delighted to get the role.
Yeah.
I suppose for me, part of that whole journey was to learn that careers can look quite linear, can't they, on paper? And if you looked at my career on paper, you'd think, well, why has she done that? She's moved from a manager role within a global law firm, and she's moved to another global law firm, but it looks to me like she's taken a step back. But actually, I think that part of the whole, one of the most important things I did was to step forward into a role that, didn't have a management element, but is full of challenge, full of interest. I work for an amazingly supportive team. What I'd learned over the years was that the value of a supportive manager. I have one of those. And so when I'm pleased to say I've not experienced much work anxiety, if any, in the last couple of years. That's an entirely new experience for me. But I think what I have finally learned is that it's okay to say to my supportive manager, I think I do need a bit of support. I've had ongoing challenges with trying to sort out support for my sister. I carried that with me into the new role. But I don't know, Susanna of 2025 is now able to say, I'm not handling this. This is a tricky week. I can still carry on with my work. This is fine. I can do it. And I need some help. And I work for a great firm who, again, are able to provide that kind of support.
Yeah. Do you look back on the times when you did have to step back and have the conversations around how you were feeling, and do you reflect on it in a way that is either moments of strength or moments of weakness?
Now I would say they are moments of strength. I can recognise that I am strong. 5 years ago I'd have said no, not strong at all. Being able to open up about what I've been through and to recognise that it's not inconsequential, that it's not that I'm not important, and actually my feelings are as important as anybody else's. And just to be able to share what's been going on here up in my head, and to, I don't know, for people not to run away screaming or be shocked, but to say, this is where you are. Yeah. Let's go to the next place together.
Of course, that wasn't a moment of weakness. I felt weak when I was asking for help, and then I realised no one, and that you have to learn that in itself. That's a whole new skill.
You do.
And then to continue to do it is humility, to continue to do it. And then of course no one reacted in the way that you were describing, and I thought, oh, okay, this isn't so bad. In my mind, it's always the analogy of standing on the edge of the cliff and not realising you've got a parachute on.
Exactly.
And the reality is the parachute's there and it will save you. And then you after you've had that experience, you go, actually, that's converted me into a much better person.
And I think it also makes you more able to help other people to take that step.
Yeah.
And I think that's been one of the things that's been amazing. Yeah. I work as a Samaritan's volunteer. Yeah. And I like to think I'm still a really good listener. I've trained as a mental health champion at HSF. There's a great network of those there. And I think having been through all of the things we've probably both been through makes us more able to help other people in the same situation reach for that parachute.